The wind howled through the jagged cliffs, carrying a chill that burned like fire against the skin. Far above the forest below, the castle of the Alpha King stood like a shadow frozen in time. Its black towers pierced the gray sky, and the flags, torn and faded, whipped violently in the storm. Inside, the Alpha King sat on his throne, a figure of cold authority. His eyes, sharp and cruel, were said to pierce through lies, secrets, and even the bravest hearts. But there was one secret he had never discovered. Until now. Far from the kingdom, in a small village hidden among dense trees, a girl moved quickly through the narrow streets. Her cloak was heavy, dark as the night, hiding the faint shimmer of something unnatural beneath. She was human in appearance, but not fully. Her eyes, a color too bright to belong to mortals, flickered with a hint of magic whenever the moonlight touched them. She was careful, for one wrong glance could reveal the truth, and if the Alpha King discovered her, there would be no mercy. Her name was Lyra. She had once walked among beings of power, a world ruled by creatures of magic and ancient laws, but she had fled that world, escaping the Alpha King's relentless pursuit. He was ruthless, obsessed with controlling those who held powers like hers. She had spent months hiding, learning the ways of humans, speaking softly, and blending in so no one would notice her strange grace or uncanny instincts. Lyra's steps echoed against the cobblestones as she reached the village square. She paused, listening. The wind carried distant cries, wolves or perhaps something worse. Her senses, sharper than any human's, twitched with warning. She pressed her cloak tighter around herself and moved to the inn at the edge of the village. Here she had taken a room under the name Ilara, a simple human girl. She left no traces of her past, no hints of the magic in her blood. Inside the inn, the fire crackled in the hearth. Villagers huddled around it, whispering and laughing, their faces pale in the candlelight. Lyra slipped into her room quietly, closing the door behind her. She placed her hands on the small wooden table and let out a long, shuddering breath. She was tired, but she could not rest, not yet. The Alpha King's reach was long, and she knew he would never stop searching. She opened a small mirror and studied her reflection. Her human disguise was perfect: brown hair, soft skin, eyes that seemed ordinary. But deep inside, she felt the pull of her true self, the strength, the magic, the otherworldly essence she kept locked away. If the king discovered even a trace of it, she would be caught, and he would not hesitate to destroy her. The night passed slowly. Lyra moved like a shadow through the village streets, gathering supplies and blending in among humans who knew nothing of the dangers beyond their world. But as dawn approached, a shiver ran down her spine. She stopped and looked to the horizon, where the first light of morning painted the sky in shades of gold and gray. Something was coming, something she had tried to outrun her entire life. It was the Alpha King. Far across the plains, his black stallion thundered through the mist, his armor gleaming even in the dim light. He moved with the confidence of a predator, every muscle taut, eyes fixed on a single target. For years he had hunted Lyra, driven by a fascination that bordered on obsession. He had learned to track her through lands where humans dared not follow, and now finally she had been found. Lyra sensed him before she saw him. A shadow at the edge of the forest, a presence that made the hairs on her arms stand. She crouched behind a cart, her heart pounding, trying to steady her breathing. She had prepared for this moment, practiced every escape, every lie. But facing him, it was different. His power was overwhelming, and there was something else, an intensity in his gaze that made her stomach twist. She needed a plan. She could not outrun him forever, not in the open. She ducked into an alley, pressing herself against the wall, waiting, and then she saw him. He dismounted with ease, his movements sharp, controlled. His cloak, black as midnight, swirled around him, and his eyes, cold, calculating, impossibly piercing, scanned the village. And then their eyes met. Lyra froze. Something inside her stirred, a force she had not felt before. The Alpha King stopped just a few feet away, studying her. His expression was unreadable, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. "You are far from home," he said, his voice low, smooth, and carrying a weight that made her knees weak. "Do you think hiding will save you?" Lyra's mind raced. She forced herself to speak in a calm, human tone. I am just a traveler," she said, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her chest. He smiled faintly, but it did not reach his eyes. "A traveler with eyes that do not belong to your kind," he said. "Tell me, girl, how long do you think you can pretend?" Her heart skipped a beat. How much did he know? How much could he sense? She swallowed, forcing a smile. I do not understand." The Alpha King tilted his head, studying her like a scholar examining a rare specimen. "Perhaps you will teach me," he murmured. There was something dangerous in his tone, a mixture of curiosity and challenge. "Or perhaps you will run and I will enjoy the chase." Lyra's instincts screamed at her to flee, to vanish into the shadows. But she also realized something terrifying. He was not like the others who had hunted her before. There was an intelligence, a patience, a power that made running useless. She had to think, to act, to survive, but more than that, she had to understand him. For hours they moved through the village in a tense game. She kept her human disguise, speaking carefully, laughing softly when necessary, hiding the magic that flickered at the edges of her vision. He watched, listened, challenged her, and yet never fully attacked. It was a dangerous balance, and each glance, each word, carried weight beyond the ordinary. When night fell again, Lyra returned to her room. She locked the door, trembling despite herself. She had survived, barely, but the Alpha King's gaze haunted her. She could not forget how it had felt when he looked into her eyes, as if he could see the truth beneath the disguise. Something inside her longed to hide, to run, but something else, something she could not name, responded to him, and she knew deep down that the chase had only just begun. From the darkness beyond the village, a shadow moved silently. The Alpha King had not left. He lingered at the edge of her hiding place, silent, patient, waiting. In his hand he held a token of recognition, a small charm that had belonged to her family long ago. He would not act yet, not until he understood fully what he had found. But he would not leave her. Lyra pressed her hands to her chest, trying to slow her racing heart. She had survived countless hunts, escaped endless traps, and yet this felt different. He was no ordinary pursuer. And when he looked at her, it was not just desire or obsession. There was something else, something deeper, something that made her both afraid and strangely alive. She knew that she could not run forever. She had to prepare, to learn, to fight, but also to understand. For the first time she felt the weight of the truth. The Alpha King had found her, not just as a prey, but as someone who could not be ignored, someone who would change his life and perhaps her own in ways she could not yet imagine. The wind rattled the windows and the fire flickered. Outside, the forest whispered secrets. The shadows danced and the Alpha King watched. And for the first time in her life, Lyra realized that she was not just hiding from him. She was being drawn into something far larger than herself, a web of power, destiny, and desire that she could not escape. And when he finally stepped into the light of the village square, she knew the truth. This was no longer a simple flight. This was the beginning of a story neither of them could control. The night held its breath, and the eyes of the Alpha King met hers once more. The dawn broke slowly over the village, painting the sky in pale gold and gray. Birds chirped in the trees, but the peace was false. Lyra's heart still raced from the night before. She had felt his presence. The Alpha King's eyes piercing through her disguise, seeing the truth hidden beneath her human mask. For the first time in years, she realized that hiding was no longer enough. She moved carefully through the streets, avoiding anyone who might speak to her too closely. Her cloak, dark as midnight, flowed behind her as she walked with purpose. She needed to understand him, to know why he did not strike immediately, why he seemed curious. But curiosity from the Alpha King was dangerous. It was a force that could consume her if she was not careful. She paused at the edge of the village and looked back toward the forest. The trees swayed in the morning wind, casting long shadows across the ground. Somewhere in that forest he was watching. She could feel it, the subtle pull of his attention on her, as if an invisible thread connected them. She shivered and pressed on, pretending to be calm, pretending to be human. Inside the inn, she gathered a few supplies: food, water, and a small dagger for protection. She had no intention of fighting him. He was too powerful. But she needed a way to defend herself, a symbol of her independence. She tied her cloak tighter and adjusted her hood, making sure that no one could see the strange shimmer of her true self. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. She could not afford a single mistake, and yet despite her caution she could not escape the feeling that she was being studied, that he was watching, learning, and waiting for her to slip. It was late morning when she first saw him openly in the village square. He moved among the villagers as if he belonged, his presence commanding attention without effort. People turned and stared, whispering among themselves, but no one dared approach him. The Alpha King had that effect, an aura of danger that made even the boldest hearts falter. Lyra froze behind a cart, her pulse quickening. He had come not to attack, but to observe. His gaze swept the streets, lingering on her, and she felt that strange mix of fear and something else she could not name. There was no hatred in his eyes, no rage, only a sharp, intelligent curiosity, like a predator sizing up its prey, but with a pause that unsettled her more than the threat itself. She knew she had to speak to him, to protect herself with words if not strength. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the open, careful to appear human, careful to hide the glow in her eyes. "I am just a traveler," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I mean no harm." He turned fully toward her, the sun catching the edges of his armor, making him shine like a dark star. "A traveler?" His voice was smooth, low, and dangerous. "You have traveled far, yet you carry secrets you cannot hide. Do you think I do not see them?" Lyra's heart skipped. He was not accusing her, not exactly. He was stating a fact she could not deny. I am only what I appear to be," she replied carefully, keeping her tone calm, controlled. He took a step closer, his gaze locked on hers. "Appearance can be deceiving," he said softly. "I have learned that over the years. But you are not like the others. You run, you hide, but there is something I sense, something that refuses to be hidden." Lyra clenched her fists, trying to steady herself. She had always been careful, always ready to flee, always prepared to vanish into shadow, and yet here he was, standing before her, seeing through her disguise without even touching her. There was power in him, and it was terrifying. "You must leave this place," he said suddenly, his tone shifting. It was no longer curiosity but command. "Go into the forest. Find a place to hide if hiding is what you must do. But know this, running will not save you forever." She wanted to flee, to vanish into the safety of the trees, but something held her back. It was not fear alone. There was a strange pull between them, a silent acknowledgement that neither fully understood. She spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "And if I do not run?" He smiled faintly, and it was a dangerous, knowing smile. "Then you will teach me something I have never known. And perhaps in time I will allow you to remain." Lyra's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at her to escape, but curiosity, that dangerous human-like curiosity, kept her rooted. Who was he, really? Why did he hesitate to strike? Was it compassion or something darker, something that made him more unpredictable than any predator she had ever faced? For the rest of the day, they moved through the village in a delicate dance of words and glances. She pretended to be human, laughed lightly at the villagers' jokes, and avoided his gaze whenever possible. Yet every time their eyes met, a spark ignited, and she felt a strange warmth she had not known in centuries. By evening, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. Lyra returned to her room, exhausted but unable to rest. The fire flickered in the hearth, and she stared at the flames, thinking of him, of his gaze, of the strange pull she could not deny. Suddenly, a knock at the door made her jump. She reached for her dagger, her muscles tense but relaxed slightly when she heard his voice. "Do not be afraid," he said. "I do not seek to harm you tonight. I only wish to speak." Lyra hesitated, then opened the door slightly. He stood in the dim light of the hallway, tall, imposing, yet something in his eyes softened the edges of his danger. "You move well among humans," he said, stepping inside. "But tell me, do you tire of pretending? Do you tire of hiding who you truly are?" She swallowed, unsure how much to reveal. I must survive," she said simply. "That is all." He nodded slowly, as if accepting her answer but not satisfied by it. "Survival is not everything," he murmured. "Sometimes understanding is more dangerous. And more necessary." For a moment they stood in silence, the tension between them thick and unspoken. The fire cast flickering shadows on the walls, and the room seemed smaller, as if their presence filled it with a strange, electric energy. Lyra felt her heart pound, and she realized she could not deny the pull she felt toward him, even as fear coiled in her stomach. Finally, he stepped back. "Rest tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we will see how far your courage can take you." And with that he left, disappearing into the night as silently as he had come. Lyra locked the door and sank to the floor, her mind racing. She had survived his first test, but she knew the next would be harder. He was no ordinary hunter, and she was no ordinary prey. Outside, the village slept, unaware of the danger that lurked in the shadows. Lyra pressed her hands to her chest, feeling the strange mix of fear, anticipation, and something else she could not name. She had run from the Alpha King for years, yet now that he had found her, she felt a pull she could not resist. She was no longer just hiding. She was caught in a game of power, desire, and survival, and neither of them would emerge unchanged. As the night deepened, the wind carried whispers of the forest and shadows moved among the trees. The Alpha King watched from afar, silent and patient, studying her, learning her patterns, waiting for the moment when she would falter. Lyra pressed herself to the window, peering out at the dark forest. She could feel him there, just beyond the edge of the village. And for the first time, she understood something terrifying and thrilling. She was no longer alone in her flight. She was being hunted, but in a way that drew her closer to him, closer than she had ever been to anyone in her long, careful life of hiding. And she knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The Alpha King was not just a threat. He was a force that would change everything, her survival, her heart, and the very fate of the world she had tried so desperately to escape. The night held its breath, and the eyes of the Alpha King met hers once more, unseen but felt, a silent promise of a dangerous, unforgettable chase to come. The morning sun filtered through the small window of Lyra's room, casting soft golden light across the wooden floor. The village was quiet, as if holding its breath after the tense night. But Lyra felt no peace. Sleep had been impossible. Every sound, a bird's call, a rustling leaf, set her nerves on edge. The Alpha King was still out there, somewhere beyond the village, waiting, watching, and she knew he would not give her a moment of true safety. She dressed carefully, pulling her dark cloak over her shoulders and adjusting the hood to hide the faint shimmer that betrayed her otherworldly nature. Every detail mattered. One mistake could reveal her secret, and after all these years of running, she could not risk being caught. She moved like a shadow through the quiet streets, careful to avoid any villager who might look too closely at her unusual grace or her piercing eyes. But as she turned a corner, she stopped. There he was, standing calmly in the square, waiting. His presence alone was enough to make the air seem heavier, charged with an invisible energy that made her heart race. He did not move toward her immediately, merely watched, as if measuring every detail of her form, her movements, even the way she breathed. "You are cautious," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the square, but not careful enough. Lyra swallowed and kept walking, forcing herself to appear calm. "I do not wish to cause trouble," she said softly, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her chest. He smiled, but it was not a smile of kindness. It was the dangerous smile of someone who held power over life and death. "Trouble finds you regardless," he said, "and so you must learn that pretending can only last for so long." For a moment she thought she saw a flicker of amusement in his eyes, and then he stepped closer, the shadows of the buildings falling around him like a cloak. Every instinct told her to flee, but something deeper, something she could not name, made her stop. "You are hiding more than your appearance," he said softly, studying her face. "There is something in you that does not belong here. Something ancient, dangerous, and beautiful." Lyra's pulse quickened. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had ever seen through the careful mask she had built over herself for centuries. She forced herself to respond in a calm, human tone. "I am only who I appear to be," she said, though her voice wavered. "Appearances can be deceiving," he replied, his gaze lingering on her eyes, which glimmered faintly in the sunlight. "And yet some truths cannot be hidden." She stopped in the middle of the square, tension coiling in her chest. Every word he spoke was a test, and every glance he cast felt like a challenge. She had run from him, avoided him, and yet now he was here, close enough to make her blood race and her heart ache in ways she had never expected. "I do not know what you want from me," she said finally, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. "I only wish to live in peace." He stepped closer still, his presence overwhelming. "Peace is a luxury few can afford," he said. "And yet, there is something in you that makes me wonder if even I might learn what it truly means." Lyra's eyes flicked to the ground, and then back to him. She had to maintain control, to keep the fragile human mask in place. But as she met his gaze again, she felt it, an almost magnetic pull, something beyond fear, beyond logic, something that made her heart beat uneven and her breath catch. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the soft sounds of the village around them. They moved together in the streets, a dangerous game of predator and prey, though neither fully understood who held the advantage. He watched, she pretended, yet every glance, every small motion carried weight beyond the ordinary. By midday, she had led him unknowingly toward the edge of the forest. The trees loomed tall, their branches heavy with leaves that whispered in the wind. Here, away from the villagers, she felt slightly safer, though his presence made that safety fragile. "You have learned to hide well," he said quietly, following her among the trees. "But hiding does not change what you are." Lyra's hand brushed against the edge of her cloak, and she realized a faint shimmer had escaped, a tiny flicker of her true self. She froze, panic rising in her chest. If he noticed? But he did. His eyes narrowed, and a slow smile spread across his face. "So the mask cracks," he said softly. "I thought it might happen eventually." She stepped back, heart hammering. I did not mean—" "You cannot help what you are," he interrupted gently yet firmly. "And perhaps you do not need to hide from me any longer." Lyra's mind raced. Could she trust him? Could she show even a glimpse of her true self without risking her life? Her instinct screamed at her to flee, but some strange force rooted her to the spot. His presence was overwhelming, yet not entirely frightening. There was a strange intensity in him, a mixture of power and curiosity, perhaps even admiration. "You do not understand," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "I have lived centuries hiding, running, pretending. I cannot let anyone see me as I truly am." He stepped closer but did not reach out. Instead, he lowered his voice. "Perhaps it is not hiding that matters," he said, "but knowing who you are and who you can trust. And maybe you might learn to trust me." Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine. She had never trusted anyone. The Alpha King was supposed to be her enemy, her relentless pursuer. Yet something in his words, in the way he spoke, made her heart ache with a strange longing she could not explain. They moved deeper into the forest, where the shadows grew longer and the light dimmer. Here she could feel the pulse of the earth, the magic that had always been a part of her. It surged faintly, responding to her emotions, to the tension that hung between them. And for the first time, she allowed herself a small measure of wonder. "You feel it," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "The energy that surrounds you. It is alive, vibrant, powerful. You cannot hide it, and perhaps you should not try." Lyra's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had ever recognized the magic that flowed through her, the strength she had spent a lifetime concealing. I cannot control it fully," she admitted, her voice soft. He nodded, his gaze steady. "Control comes with understanding, and understanding comes with trust, something neither of us can offer lightly." They stopped by a small stream, the water sparkling in the dim light. She knelt by it, trying to calm her racing heart, trying to regain some measure of composure. But he did not leave. He stood nearby, silent, watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You are not like the others," he said finally. "You fight, you hide, you survive, but there is something in you that seeks more than mere survival. And perhaps that is why I cannot let you go." Lyra turned her eyes to him, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. There was no malice, no cruelty, only raw, undeniable power and a strange, dangerous interest. She wanted to speak, to argue, to run, but the words caught in her throat. "You are dangerous," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "And yet, I cannot leave you entirely." He took a step closer, his shadow falling across the water. "And I cannot leave you," he said. "No matter how hard I try." The forest seemed to close around them, the wind whispering through the trees, carrying secrets of centuries and shadows of power. Lyra realized that she could no longer hide entirely, not from him, not from herself. The mask she had worn for so long was beginning to crack, revealing truth she had tried to bury. And for the first time, she felt something she had not felt in centuries, a fragile, trembling hope that perhaps, in the presence of this relentless, dangerous man, she could find not just survival but understanding, and maybe even something more. The sun dipped lower and the forest darkened. Shadows stretched long, wrapping around them, and the tension between hunter and hunted deepened. Lyra felt the pull of his gaze, the invisible thread that connected them, stronger now than ever. And in that quiet, suspended moment, she knew that the mask she had relied on for centuries could no longer protect her. The Alpha King had seen the truth in her eyes, and she could not turn away. The forest held its breath, and so did she as the Alpha King stepped closer. His eyes locked on hers, a silent promise of danger, desire, and a destiny neither of them could escape. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale light over the forest. Mist curled between the trees, hiding paths and shadows alike. Lyra moved quietly, her cloak drawn tight, her steps careful on the damp ground. The events of the past days weighed heavily on her. The Alpha King had not left the village, nor had he stopped following her. His presence lingered like a shadow she could not shake. Yet as terrifying as he was, she felt a strange pull toward him, a connection she could not understand. Every glance, every word, every subtle movement spoke of power and danger, and of something else, something deeper. She tried to ignore it, to focus on survival, but it was impossible. The forest grew thicker, the light dimming as she walked deeper. She had chosen this path deliberately, hoping the trees would hide her from him or at least give her time to think. But she sensed him even here, somewhere just beyond the edge of her vision. He was patient, relentless, and oddly careful. Suddenly, a rustling in the underbrush caught her attention. She froze, hand on the dagger at her side. A small figure stepped from the shadows, a creature of her kind but twisted by dark magic. Its eyes glowed faintly and it moved with unnatural grace. Lyra's heart raced. She had been careful, but she had not expected this. "You cannot escape forever," the creature hissed, its voice cold and unnatural. "The king will have you, and so will we." Lyra's pulse quickened. She could fight, but not alone. Her powers, though strong, were unpredictable, and the creature was fast. She had to think. With a swift motion, she leapt aside, letting her cloak shimmer faintly, a distraction born of magic. The creature hissed, confused, giving her the precious seconds she needed to run. But as she fled, she realized she had no path to safety. The forest was unfamiliar, and the creature pursued relentlessly. Panic surged in her chest. She needed help, someone who could match the Alpha King in strength and cunning, and then she felt it. A presence behind her, calm, powerful, inevitable. The Alpha King. He stepped from the shadows as if materializing from the mist itself. His eyes glimmered with a dangerous mix of curiosity and intensity. The creature froze, sensing a stronger power, and hesitated. "Step aside," he commanded, his voice low and commanding. The words carried weight, and the creature obeyed, retreating slowly into the trees. Lyra's breath caught. She wanted to run, to flee into the safety of the forest, but something in his stance, in his gaze, held her in place. He did not move closer aggressively. Instead, he extended a hand, steady, confident, as if offering her a choice. "You cannot face this alone," he said softly. "Let me help you," her mind raced. Could she trust him? He had hunted her for years, yet here he was, protecting her. Was it strategy or something else? She glanced at the retreating creature, then back at him. Slowly she nodded, accepting the unspoken offer. He moved with her through the forest, every step precise, aware of danger, aware of her. They arrived at a small clearing where sunlight filtered through the trees and the world seemed quieter, safer. For a moment the forest held its breath, and so did she. "You are strong," he said quietly, observing her. "But you hide more than just your appearance. There is a weight you carry, a history, and perhaps even a fear you cannot escape." Lyra swallowed. How much could she tell him? How much could she reveal without losing control? "I have lived a long time," she said softly. "I have seen betrayal, loss. I cannot trust easily." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And yet trust is what you must learn. Not for me, but for yourself. You cannot hide forever. The world will find you, and when it does, you must be ready." They spent hours in the clearing, moving carefully through exercises to test her control over her powers. The Alpha King did not command her. He guided her, offering advice, corrections, and gentle warnings. For the first time, she felt a strange sense of partnership. He was not only her pursuer, he was her mentor in this moment, helping her harness the strength she had long kept hidden. As the sun dipped lower, the forest grew darker, and shadows stretched long across the clearing. Lyra felt a surge of emotion, fear, gratitude, and a dangerous, unfamiliar longing. She had spent centuries avoiding attachment, avoiding vulnerability, and yet here, in the presence of the man who had hunted her, she felt an unspoken bond forming. The Alpha King studied her closely, his gaze softening for a brief moment. "You are remarkable," he said quietly, "and yet you are not free. There are forces that seek to use you, to bind you, to control you. You must be careful whom you trust." She nodded, though her mind was torn. Could she trust him fully? Or was this another layer of his game? Another way to draw her closer before striking? Her instinct screamed caution, yet her heart felt something she could not name. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A dark, swirling mist rose from the forest floor, carrying with it whispers of ancient magic. Lyra's eyes widened. She had never sensed this kind of power before. It was malevolent, overwhelming, and aimed directly at her. The Alpha King moved swiftly, placing himself between her and the mist. His hand rested briefly on her shoulder, steadying her, grounding her in a way that made her pulse race. "Stay behind me," he said. "Do not try to fight this alone." Lyra obeyed, her breath shallow as the mist swirled closer. Shadows moved within it, shapes that twisted and shifted as if alive. She felt her magic stir, trembling at the edges, but he did not let her act recklessly. Instead, he extended his own power, a controlled, commanding force that pushed against the dark energy, holding it at bay. The struggle lasted minutes, though it felt like hours. Lyra watched in awe as he manipulated the power around them, bending the shadows, countering the dark magic with precision and strength. She realized that he was more than a king. He was a force of nature, a being whose control over the supernatural rivaled her own potential. When the mist finally dissipated, leaving the clearing quiet and still, Lyra's knees weakened and she sank to the ground. The Alpha King extended a hand, helping her to her feet. Their eyes met, and in that instant something unspoken passed between them. A mixture of respect, trust, and something else, something deeper, dangerous and impossible to define. "You see now," he said softly, "that you cannot face the world alone, but with guidance, with trust, you can survive and perhaps even thrive." Lyra nodded, her chest heavy with emotion. She had spent centuries running, hiding, fearing both herself and others. And yet, in the presence of this relentless, dangerous man, she felt a glimmer of something she had thought impossible: hope. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the forest darkened further. Shadows danced across their faces as they made their way back toward the village. Careful, alert, and aware of every sound, Lyra felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. She had learned to survive, but now she realized that survival alone was not enough. She needed understanding, guidance, and perhaps even connection. As they reached the edge of the forest, the Alpha King stopped. He turned to her, his expression serious, and yet there was a softness there she had never seen. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we face more than shadows. There are forces in this world that will test you, test us both, and you must be ready." Lyra nodded, though her mind was swirling with thoughts and emotions she could not fully name. She had faced danger before, but never like this, not with someone so powerful, so unpredictable, so magnetic. The Alpha King's eyes met hers one final time before he vanished into the shadows of the forest. She stood alone, the cool night air brushing against her skin, and realized that her journey was far from over. Her disguise, her careful human mask, was beginning to crack. Her powers, her past, and the dangerous connection with the Alpha King were all pulling her into a future she could not control. And yet, for the first time in centuries, she felt something fragile but undeniable, a sense of possibility, of trust, of a future where she might not have to run forever. The night was silent, but it carried a promise of storms to come, both in the world around her and within her heart. And as she closed her eyes, she knew one thing with certainty: the Alpha King would not let her go, and she could not escape the truth of their bond, no matter how fiercely she tried. The forest was quiet in the early morning, but the air thrummed with unseen energy. Lyra stood at the edge of the clearing, her heart pounding, her mind alive with tension. Today was the day she could no longer hide. The Alpha King had promised that they would face the forces that sought her, and she knew he was right. The shadows of her past, the magic that had defined her life, and the dangerous bond between them were converging here, now. She drew a slow, steadying breath, feeling the pulse of her own power rising within her. For centuries, she had run from what she was, afraid of the strength and magic that lay at her core, and for centuries she had hidden from the Alpha King, from the world, from herself. But now, standing in the early light, she realized that running was no longer an option. He appeared suddenly, emerging from the shadows with the fluid grace of someone who moved as much with instinct as with skill. His eyes met hers immediately, sharp and commanding, yet softer than she had ever seen them. "You are ready," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "But are you ready to face the truth of who you are?" Lyra's lips pressed into a firm line. "I am ready," she said, though her heart beat wildly. She did not know if she could control everything that might happen, but she knew she could not let fear rule her. The Alpha King extended his hand. "Then come," he said. "We do this together." They moved deeper into the forest, the shadows stretching around them like dark fingers. Soon they arrived at a clearing unlike any Lyra had ever seen. The trees bent inward, forming an almost circular canopy, and at the center was a stone pedestal glowing faintly with an ancient pulsating light. Dark mist curled around its base, and the whispers of unseen forces filled the air. Lyra's pulse quickened. She could feel the magic here, older and stronger than anything she had encountered. She stepped closer, and the light seemed to respond to her presence, flickering and pulsing like a heartbeat. "You feel it, don't you?" the Alpha King said, standing beside her. "This place is alive with power, and it recognizes you." Lyra nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "I've never felt anything like this," she admitted. "It's overwhelming." "It is," he agreed. "And yet it is part of you. You cannot hide from it any longer. The world, your destiny, your power, they are intertwined. And today you must claim them." Before she could respond, the dark mist at the base of the pedestal began to swirl faster, rising in violent waves. Shadows formed shapes, twisting into creatures of pure darkness, their glowing eyes fixed on her. Lyra instinctively stepped back, but the Alpha King's hand rested on her shoulder, steadying her. "Do not fear," he said softly. "You are stronger than they believe. And you are not alone." The creatures lunged, and Lyra felt a surge of power unlike anything before. Her magic flared, bright and sharp, a brilliant blue light that illuminated the clearing. She moved instinctively, controlling the energy with a precision born of desperation and experience. The shadows hissed and recoiled, but they did not vanish entirely. The Alpha King moved beside her, combining his own power with hers. Together they created a shield of light that pushed back the darkness. The creatures writhed and shrieked, but they could not break through. Lyra felt a thrill of fear and excitement as she realized that for the first time she was not running. She was standing her ground, fighting and controlling her power. "You are extraordinary," he said, his voice low, filled with admiration. "Do you see now what you can do?" Lyra's eyes blazed with energy as she nodded. I can't lose control," she said, though a small smile touched her lips. "I can't let them take this from me." The shadows surged again, stronger and more determined, but Lyra met them with a new courage. Her magic flowed freely, pulsing in time with her heartbeat, shining with a strength that was hers alone. And beside her, the Alpha King was unwavering, his presence a pillar of support and power. Minutes, or perhaps hours, passed in a blur of motion and energy. Lyra's magic danced and flared, the shadows struggling to contain her. And then, with a final surge, she concentrated all her strength into a single brilliant wave of light. The dark creatures screamed and dissolved, the mist evaporating like smoke in sunlight. The clearing fell silent. The pedestal glowed softly, now calm and steady, and Lyra felt a wave of exhaustion and relief wash over her. She sank to her knees, breathing heavily, her powers finally settling. The Alpha King knelt beside her, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You have done it," he said softly. "You have faced what no one else could, and you have claimed your power. You are no longer hiding. You are free." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Free?" she whispered. She had spent centuries in fear, in hiding and running. Could this really be the moment when she finally let go? "Yes," he said firmly, yet gently. "Free from fear, from hiding, from doubt. You have proven yourself, and in doing so you have earned your place, not just in the world, but in your own destiny." Her heart swelled with emotions she could barely name: relief, pride, and something deeper, something dangerous and tender. She realized in that moment that the bond she had felt with him all along was not just fear or fascination. It was trust. It was understanding. And it was beginning to grow into something she had never allowed herself to feel. I don't know what to say," she admitted softly. I've never been seen like this before." He smiled, a rare softness in his eyes. Then do not say anything. Let your actions speak. Let your strength, your courage, your heart. Let them speak for you. Lyra felt tears prick at her eyes, but she did not move away. She had faced death, shadows, and her own fear, and she had survived. And now she realized she had survived not just because of her power, but because of the connection she shared with him, the Alpha King who had once been her hunter, and now stood as her ally, her partner, perhaps even more. As the sun rose higher, spilling golden light through the trees, the clearing seemed to transform. The shadows of the past had lifted, leaving only warmth, light, and the promise of a future that was hers to shape. The Alpha King stood, offering his hand to her. Lyra rose slowly, taking it, feeling the strength in his grip and the steady reassurance in his presence. She had no words for the storm of emotions inside her, but she felt a quiet certainty. She had faced the darkness, and she had not only survived but grown stronger. "We have done it," he said, his voice low and steady. "Together?" Lyra nodded, her heart full. "Together," she repeated. For the first time in centuries, she felt no need to hide, no need to run. She was herself, fully, completely. And she knew that whatever came next, she would face it with courage, with strength, and with him by her side. The forest whispered around them, the ancient trees bearing witness to the moment. Shadows faded, light shone, and the air seemed to hum with life and promise. Lyra looked at the Alpha King, and for the first time, she saw not just a predator or a king, but a being who could understand her, who could match her, and who had become something more than she had ever dared to hope for. And in that quiet, suspended moment, she realized that the bond between them was not defined by fear or power, but by trust, respect, and the unspoken understanding that they were stronger together than apart. The journey had been long, dangerous, and uncertain, but Lyra knew this. She was no longer running. She was free, and whatever the future held, she would face it with courage, magic, and the Alpha King, no longer a hunter but a partner, standing beside her through the shadows and the light. The forest breathed around them, calm and still, and for the first time in centuries, Lyra allowed herself to feel hope, trust, and the quiet thrill of a destiny reclaimed. She had faced the darkness, claimed her power, and discovered that even in a world of kings, shadows, and magic, there was room for courage, connection, and even something like love. And the Alpha King, watching her, saw it too, the truth of her strength, her heart, and the promise of a future that neither would ever forget. The world was theirs to face now, together.